2 weeks had passed, and Blake, having earned some money from the cardboard boxes, decided to invite Sofia for a coffee. Sofia was thrilled, even happy. This time, she arrived at the park gates without delay, and Blake was already waiting, holding a bouquet of purple roses. "What beautiful roses!" Sofia exclaimed in admiration. "How did you know, Blake, that purple roses are my favorite flowers?" "Intuition," Blake smiled. "Men can have it too. Are you ready for a walk in the park?" "Of course," Sofia replied. The park smelled of spring, the dark snow was melting underfoot, birds chattered in the leafless trees. The turquoise sky was radiant, and the air was filled with a wonderful freshness that invigorated the soul. "I rarely come to the park," Sofia confessed, "even though it's just a few steps from my home." "Thank you, Blake." The man smiled and suggested, "Shall we go to the cafe now?" They sat at the same table by the window, and Blake ordered coffee and pastries, apologizing as he did so. "I'm sorry, but this is all I can treat you to. Unfortunately, they don't pay much in the workshop." Sofia, despite his modesty, was curious and asked, "By the way, Blake, how long do you plan to work with us? Do you have any long-term plans?" Blake shrugged and replied, "Plans? I can't stay in the shelter forever. I intend to save money, restore my documents, rent an apartment, and find a job. I hope our acquaintance will continue after that." "Of course," Sofia nodded. Blake offered, "More pastries?" "I think not," Sofia smiled. "Coffee and pastries are enough. I don't think you can feed a man for long with cream puffs." Sofia suddenly suggested, "You know, Blake, let's go to my place. I'll treat you now." Blake hesitated and said, "Well, it's a bit awkward." Showing determination, Sofia stood up and assured him, "It's not inconvenient at all, let's go." Blake paid for the coffee and pastries, then followed Sofia, who led him to her apartment. Riding the elevator, they entered her cozy abode. "Take off your coat," she said with a smile. Blake admired the interior and whispered, "It's so cozy and beautiful here," while examining reproductions of classical paintings on the walls. Afterward, he moved to the kitchen and sat at the table. Sofia poured tea for her guests and then opened the refrigerator. "Oh, it's a bit barren in my fridge," she said with a sigh. "I didn't expect to bring you here." "Nothing," Blake smiled. Sofia suggested, "You know what we'll do. I'll give you my bank card, and you'll go to the store. I'll write you a shopping list." Blake started to object, but Sofia responded with a smile, "No objections accepted." She took a pen and paper, quickly composing a shopping list: bread, salami, mayonnaise, eggs, wine. Blake read the list and asked, "Wine? Are you a teetotaler?" "I can do without it, actually, but believe me, I'm not a drinker," Sofia cheerfully replied. "I can enjoy good wine, and I'm not one of those alcoholics. So go ahead, my knight, to the store." "Knight," Blake repeated with pleasure. "Understood, my fair lady. If you have any further text requests or additional questions, feel free to let me know." The man quickly went to the store and brought back the groceries. Sofia poured wine into glasses and asked, "What shall we toast to?" "To you, my dear Sofia," Blake said. "You saved my life, and I owe you an immeasurable debt." Sofia and Blake clinked their glasses and each took a sip. Then, Sofia began preparing dinner. She boiled eggs, grated beets, prepared fish and herring under a fur coat. She also made sandwiches with salami and cheese. She then invited Blake, saying, "Please join me at the table." "A feast fit for the gods," Blake exclaimed. "Better than in restaurants?" Sofia playfully inquired. "Better. But you said you dined in restaurants, Blake, in your previous life. I wonder who you were. A Saudi prince, a millionaire's son, a shadowy oligarch." Sofia, her wine influence already noticeable, laughed merrily, her eyes sparkling. "Everything is much more prosaic and at the same time scarier," Blake joked. But Sofia persisted and asked, "Still, tell me about yourself." "I can say one thing," the man replied. "Right now I'm in the company of a beautiful, kind girl, and I'm quite happy. I'm about to start a new life, and I hope that an important place in it will be taken by you." "You're not saying anything about your past," Sofia pouted and lightly hit Blake with a rose. "I'll tell you about everything in due time, I promise. But for now, Blake approached Sofia and gently embraced her. The young woman didn't pull away. "Sofia," Blake whispered, "I love you." At that moment, Sofia was the first to press her lips to Blake's, initiating a sweet, long, lingering kiss. "You are sent to me by fate," Blake tenderly said as Sofia finally pulled away from his lips and nestled her face against his chest. "For now, there isn't much I can tell you about myself, but in time, as I get back on my feet and start a new life, you'll learn everything." "Yes, yes," Sofia whispered in response. "Don't tell me anything just yet." I'll wait as long as it takes. As light as a reed, Blake scooped up the young woman in his arms and carried her to the bedroom, where he gently placed her on the bed. He was incredibly tender with Sofia, and she thought that she had never had a better man. In the morning, Sofia woke up feeling happy, lying alone in bed. Blake, she whispered nervously, fearing that her beloved had left. Yes, my fair lady, and Blake entered the bedroom, carrying 2 plates with omelets. Here's breakfast, my lady. How sweet, Sophia exclaimed. I had a wonderful time with you, she confessed during breakfast. You are so gentle and kind. I had a wonderful time with you, too, Blake replied. Well, it's time for work, Sophia suddenly realized. Yes, it's time for me to assemble my boxes, Blake smiled. If you have any further text requests or additional questions, feel free to let me know. They arrived at the shelter together, hand in hand, like a couple. The shelter staff and residents greeted them with hearty laughter. So, are you definitely engaged now? Aunt Holly asked, playfully smiling. Blake smiled, shrugged his shoulders, and headed to his workshop, while Sophia, looking defiant, replied, why not? Aunt Holly couldn't help but clap her hands mockingly, saying, congratulations, congratulations. Soon, the entire shelter, both staff and residents, were talking about how the young nurse Sophia was dating a homeless man. Blake and Sophia spent time together, meeting several times. Each time Blake received his salary, he would give Sophia a modest gift, flowers, an inexpensive ring, or a charming trinket. Sophia would invite Blake to her home, treat him to delicious meals, share wine, and wake up next to him in the morning, feeling like a happy woman. She accepted the fact that Blake didn't reveal anything about his past, and she focused on the present. Compassionate Aunt Thea would sometimes caution Sophia, aren't you tired of getting burned by men? You've reached a point where you're sleeping with a homeless man from the shelter, picked up a fiancé on the street, no less. He'll leave you, your Blake will play with you like a gilded trinket, and then he'll toss you in the mud and trample you. Sophia defended Blake, saying, Blake is not like everyone else. How do you know? Aunt Thea would ask. I don't know, I can feel it, Sophia would say. That's just it, you don't know, Aunt Thea would conclude. I'm not a gilded trinket, I'm golden, Sophia would muse, delving into her thoughts. Her thoughts persistently troubled her, like tiny seeds of doubt taking root in her young soul. Sophia was afraid of the bitter loss of Blake, a man who had become her pillar and the meaning of her life. What if all these moments of happiness are just a game in the shelter? Her thoughts swirled tortuously like restless phantoms. What if Blake is just having fun here and will leave, leaving me alone, not taking me into his new life? Will I end up, once again, without support, like an empty pitcher? One day, during the usual ritual, Sophia, as always, dutifully helped Aunt Holly with the dishes, while Aunt Thea sparkled as she polished and gleamed throughout the kitchen. Suddenly, Uncle Ray, who often dropped by for a cup of fragrant tea, burst into their everyday world. An invisible wave of tension filled the room when Blake appeared in the doorway. Sophia felt her heart lurch with bitter reality, seeing something in his eyes that she didn't expect. Sophia, Blake began, lacking any trace of warmth in his voice, and her heart pierced with sadness. Yes, she replied, trying to keep her composure. Sophia, Blake repeated, his voice low, like the harbinger of sad news. Today, I finally got my passport restored, and I've earned enough money to rent a place for myself. Sophia swallowed hard, fearing the continuation of his words. And, she whispered, as if in prayer, I'm leaving the shelter, Blake declared, and Sophia's heart felt like it was pierced by a needle. I have to build my own life. Yes, Sophia sighed sadly, accepting the inevitable loss. Today I'm leaving, Blake continued, and the pain in her heart became unbearable. Don't worry, I won't forget you. I believe in you, Sophia whispered, tears filling her eyes, but she held them back. Blake, without hesitating in front of Aunt Holly, Aunt Thea and Uncle Ray gently embraced Sophia and kissed her passionately. At that moment, the room was filled with exclamations of admiration. Oh, how sweet, Uncle Ray exclaimed, genuinely happy for the young couple. Overwhelmed by a surge of emotions, Sophia whispered to Blake, goodbye, don't forget me. Blake took one more lingering look at his beloved, as if etching her face into his memory forever, then turned decisively and left the shelter. Sophia, trying to hold back her tears, couldn't help but sob quietly. Well, Aunt Holly asked with a teasing smile, has your fiancé flown the coop like a rooster? In response, laughter and jokes filled the room to lighten the mood. Roosters don't fly, Uncle Ray humorously noted. Then, fly away like a parrot. Aunt Holly continued to jest, trying to uplift Sophia's spirits. However, Aunt T, always straightforward, expressed her opinion. You're a fool, Sophia. Your Blake used and discarded you. Did you engage in this with him, I wonder? Sophia reacted with anger. That's none of your business. Nevertheless, Aunt T sighed and condescendingly added, so, you did. After that, she walked away to tend to her own business, leaving Sophia with her own thoughts and feelings. Sophia managed to finish her shift somehow, but painful scars remained in the young woman's heart. Doubt scratched at her inner world, and she didn't want to accept what the ants from the shelter had said. Troubling thoughts swarmed around her like a swarm of wasps, and it seemed to her that parting with Blake had been cold and indifferent. Why didn't he even look back when he left the kitchen? Mocking lines like he flew away like a parrot continued to haunt her thoughts. In the evening, Sophia walked home, and even though spring had long arrived, the sky overhead was dark gray today and thick snow fell, melting in the air before reaching the ground. The world felt prickly and unwelcoming to her, mirroring her inner state. She had the desire to just relax and cry, pondering questions like, who was Blake really? He remained a mystery to her, the man she had saved from frostbite one winter morning. Blake left without revealing anything about himself, leaving her in the dark. Who were his loved ones? Were his parents still alive? Maybe he even had a wife and children. Sometimes dark doubts tormented Sophia that everything they had together was just a random amorous adventure for him. I'm a fool, a fool, a fool, she silently repeated to herself as she approached her building. Upon entering her apartment, Sophia decisively undressed and quickly washed up. Then she headed to the kitchen, despite having no appetite. The table with cabbage and tomato paste was already set, and Sophia picked up her fork, intending to start eating. However, when the scent of stewed cabbage and tomato paste filled the air, it seemed to permeate every pore of her skin, evoking a terrible sensation. Reacting like a panther, Sophia threw the plate into the trash bin and rushed to the bathroom, suffering from nausea. What is happening to me? Where is all this coming from all of a sudden? Suddenly, she felt a strange craving for salty mushrooms. What could this mean? Sophia hesitated to fully contemplate this thought, but despite the late hour and her fatigue, she quickly got dressed and headed to the nearest pharmacy. There, she bought a pregnancy test. Despite her doubts, the test showed two clear pink lines. My goodness, I'm pregnant, Sophia thought. Getting pregnant by a stranger she had picked up from the street, who had earned a little money to get by and then disappeared, seemed utterly absurd. Fate, it seemed, was playing a joke on Sophia. I'll have an abortion, was the first thought that came to her in despair. However, in the very next moment, she made a resolute decision. No, 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 no. Despite all the difficulties and doubts, Sophia believed in Blake, believed that he would return for her, even though the rational basis for this belief was extremely fragile. I won't harm our baby, motherhood is a joy. Maybe I'll never be able to get pregnant again. I must keep the child, and if Blake returns, we'll have a complete family. If he doesn't return, then I'll raise my little one on my own. Sophia decided to keep her secret news hidden at work. Among her colleagues, she had no close friends, and she didn't want to subject herself to ridicule or pitiful attempts to pry into her life. But, despite her efforts, avoiding mockery was not possible. Sophia was literally greeted with a song, the groom ran away, like a rooster. Yes, her pregnancy remained a secret only for a while. As perceptive as experienced detectives, Aunts Holly and T noticed that Sophia started bringing pickles and salty cookies for her lunch, and they suspected that something unusual was happening. Not only did they guess, but it seemed they had even convinced themselves that Sophia was pregnant. Since then, conversations at the shelter revolved solely around this topic. Blake impregnated you, and he disappeared. You should have used protection, silly. Sophia responded to the taunts with a strong and proud demeanor, but her heart was torn apart by sorrow. How did this happen? Will Blake really not return? Will I be raising the child on my own? After all, Blake didn't even save my phone number, she thought, battling sleepless nights and doubts. Days, as if in a wrong dream, slowly passed while Sophia continued to perform her duties at work, endure taunts, and become increasingly convinced that she had indeed been naive. Blake, who initially seemed sweet and attentive, turned out to be nothing more than an exploiter of Sophia. Yes, he gave her flowers, quoted Ike's poems, and drew inspiration from romantic comedies that would go down in history, but in the end, he turned out to be just like all the other Cedars. 3 long months went by, and Sophia's belly was noticeably protruding. This became a fertile topic for Aunt T's and Aunt Holly's sarcastic comments, and even Uncle Wright, who didn't miss an opportunity to tease, asked, "Sophia, are you planning to raise the child or find a new homeless guy next time?" It was time to take maternity leave. Sophia, feeling bitter embarrassment, almost cried under the condescending gazes of her colleagues. She approached the door of the boss's office and knocked. "May I come in?" she barely managed to say in her state. "Come in," came the reply. It was time to officially request maternity leave, and Sophia, filled with a sense of embarrassment, nearly withered under the piercing gazes of her colleagues. Trembling, she made her way to the boss's office door and knocked. "May I?" Sophia attempted to make her voice more confident. "Come in." Sophia cautiously opened the door and entered the office, where her boss, Ken, engrossed in folders and papers, didn't pay much attention to her. "What is it, Sophia?" the boss calmly inquired without looking up. Sophia began to speak, embarrassed but firm. "I need to take maternity leave." The boss raised his eyes and assessed Sophia with a calculating look, as if weighing her request. Suddenly, thoughts raced through her mind. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll give birth to a healthy baby, give them a beautiful name, and love my child, regardless of past hurts. I might even be grateful to Blake for making me a mother. I'll become the happiest parent and raise a worthy member of society." The boss spoke, his thoughts playing out. "Of course, you should take maternity leave. But what does your fiancé think about it?" Sophia froze for a moment. "My fiancé," she repeated syllable by syllable, flaring up with indignation. "Ken, are you mocking me?" Her voice was charged with anger and determination. Ken, usually stern and inscrutable, wasn't offended by Sophia's boldness. Instead, he merely smiled, picked up the telephone receiver and said, "Blake, come in." The mention of Blake left Sophia puzzled and bewildered. A few moments later, Blake entered the office with a smile on his face, carrying purple roses. "Hello, Ken," Blake greeted the boss and then turned to Sophia, offering her the flowers. However, instead of taking the bouquet, Sophia burst into tears. "Where have you been for these 3 months?" she asked with despair. "I'm pregnant with your child." "I know, dear, we have a lot to discuss. I won't leave you again." With tears in her eyes, Sophia buried her face in Blake's chest, and he gently embraced the young woman and led her out of the office. "Wow," Aunt T commented upon seeing Sophia and Blake. And Uncle Wright, a kind-hearted man at heart, couldn't resist a jest. "Oh my, our parrot has returned." Blake and Sophia walked through the floor, in full view of the staff and shelter residents, drawing attention with their tender affection. Everyone viewed the scene with admiration and warmth, and their mutual devotion warmed the hearts of all those present. "Where are we headed?" Sophia wiped away tears of happiness and asked, not letting go of Blake's hand. Blake smiled and replied, "We're heading to the most exquisite restaurant in town. It may not be as delightful as your cooking, but I must treat you on this special day." Sophia couldn't hide her surprise. "But I haven't finished my work day yet." Blake reassured her, "Don't worry, I've already arranged everything with Ken. You can consider your maternity leave started. We'll discuss all our questions and concerns, including our baby's name." Waiting at the shelter's gate was a luxurious car. Blake politely bowed and opened the door for Sophia, inviting her inside. He took the driver's seat, and Sophia still couldn't believe what was happening. "Where are you taking me, Blake?" she asked, barely believing her happiness. Blake smiled mysteriously. "We're going to choose a restaurant where we'll celebrate our wedding." Sophia gasped as if she had entered a fairy tale. Half an hour later, Blake parked in front of an upscale, elite restaurant. Sophia asked with trepidation, "Are we going here?" This extravagant restaurant was something unimaginable for her, something she hadn't even dared to dream about. Blake smiled and replied, "Yes, my lovely lady." He exited the car first and politely opened the door for Sophia. Then he led her into the restaurant, where the doorman saluted the guests on the grand staircase. In the luxurious hall, illuminated by sparkling round chandeliers, Blake and Sophia were welcomed by a radiant waitress. Blake confidently said, "We have a table by the window reserved." The waitress politely responded, "Certainly, I'll escort you," and led them to their table, offering the menu. "When you're ready to order, please ring the bell," she added. Blake opened the menu and handed it to Sophia, saying, "Choose everything delicious, my dear." Sophia couldn't take her eyes off the photos of exquisite dishes in the menu, and her mouth watered. However, the prices intimidated her. "Blake, the prices here are quite high," she admitted with a sigh. Blake smiled and said, "Just cover the prices with your hand and choose dishes based on the names and pictures." Sophia was puzzled. "Are you sure you can afford everything? Let's say, the homeless guy you picked up from the street is actually very wealthy." Blake smiled mysteriously. Let's eat first, and then I'll tell you everything. In the end, Sophia placed her order, selecting poached eggs, French toast, and a vegetable salad, while Blake ordered a schnitzel and an Olivier salad. For drinks, they chose a light red wine. Blake tenderly said, "You're pregnant, but one glass won't hurt you. To your health and the health of our little one." After just one glass, Sophia felt the alcohol start to take effect. She hadn't drunk alcohol for a long time, and now she felt a lightness like a bird soaring through the skies. It seems that Cinderella has indeed found her prince, she thought happily. Everything around her felt incredible, like a fairy tale. Blake refilled their glasses, but Sophia declined, saying, "No, I've had enough. Now I want to hear from you." Blake kissed her hand and said, "My dear, the first thing I want to tell you is that I've returned for good, if you'll have me." Tears of joy filled Sophia's eyes. "Of course, I'll have you," she replied. "For two reasons. My child needs a biological father, and I love you." Blake smiled and said, "I love you too, my dear Sophia. You not only saved me from freezing, but you've given me the will to keep living. You are the best woman I've ever met, believe me." Sophia nodded and asked, "And now, tell me everything from the very beginning, from the moment you ended up on the street." Blake frowned and sighed deeply. "Let's start from the very beginning. I'm the son of a billionaire, the owner of a large chain of beauty salons. Our business was quite successful, bringing in a stable income. I also had a brother and a sister. My father didn't really like my brother and sister, but he was never hard on me." Sophia couldn't help but notice the past tense Blake used and asked, "He wasn't hard on you? Why are you talking about your father in the past tense, Blake?" Blake explained, "My father passed away recently, but let me tell you everything step by step." Sophia agreed, "Yes, please tell me. Why did your father love you and not your brother and sister?" Blake pondered for a moment before answering, "Well, how can I put it? I don't want to speak ill of my brother and sister, but my brother grew up as rough and insolent. Barely reaching the age of 18, he openly frequented questionable places, used drugs, and abused alcohol. My sister, well, she wasn't the most virtuous girl, to put it mildly. And the most important thing was that she adored my brother and always put his interests above everything." Sophia was intrigued and asked, "And what about you? What were you like?" Blake smiled, "I was a quiet, modest boy. At the age of 15, I discovered the world of Persian and Turkic classical poetry. The same ache, remember. I grew up among books, composed stories and poems. My father often sighed and said that he had one son who loved business and another who was a romantic poet. He wondered whom to entrust the business to." Sophia nodded in understanding and asked, "So, what did your father decide?" Blake continued, "The answer to that question was in his will. When my father passed away and we opened his will in the presence of a lawyer, it stated that 80% of the assets were to go to me, while my brother and sister would receive only 10% each. In his farewell letter, my father advised me to rely on trusted managers, not to interfere in the business, live off the interest, and focus on my poetry and Turkology. That's how it was." Sophia was taken aback and asked, "And how did your brother and sister react to your father's decision?" "No, they didn't accept it," Blake replied, gazing into the distance. "So, how did you end up on the streets?" Sophia asked sympathetically. Blake sighed deeply and said, "Oh, it's quite a heavy story. I want to emphasize that I don't want to speak ill of my brother and sister, but it turned out that they had incredible manipulative skills." "Let me hear it." "Blake, I'm ready to listen to you all the way," Sophia said, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Well, my brother and sister devised a cunning plan to portray me as someone with serious mental issues," Blake continued. "It would take a long time to list all the manipulations and deceit they resorted to, but in the end, they convinced close relatives that I needed treatment in a strictly regulated psychiatric hospital. There, in that gloomy institution, I found myself without a passport, with no way to contact the outside world. I was subjected to compulsory heavy medication, and sometimes even physical abuse," Blake concluded, and his hand squeezed Sophia's. "Blake," Sophia said passionately, "this is terrible. But we're together now, and we will find a way to get justice for you and leave this past behind forever." Blake smiled bitterly, recalling the hard times. "For me, Sophia, it was a real test of endurance. During that horrible period spent in the psychiatric hospital, I hadn't lost hope in life yet. Incredibly, I managed to escape from there, and here I am, on the street, with nothing but the clothes on my back. Attempts to seek help from the police quickly failed because, without a passport, they simply ignored me. This had somewhat eroded my faith in the fairness of our legal system." Blake sighed and continued, "For a few weeks, I roamed the cold city and my will to live was dwindling. I fell to the ground, and I was cursing my fate, ready to die. It was at that very moment that you found me, my dear lady, and breathed into me that warm spark of hope. When I ended up in the shelter, ate and cleaned up, I realized that I had a chance, at least, to stay alive and start a new life, even if without my father's wealth. I was considering a plan: return to work, earn enough to get my passport reinstated, rent a room, and find a modest place in the world. I dreamt of you becoming my wife, and we would begin a modest but happy life. But why did you disappear? Blake continued his story. After I earned some money, I moved into a rental apartment. Our family lawyer, an honest man, found me and convinced me to fight for what was rightfully mine. My brother and sister were in a moral and legal quagmire, and the legal process brought me justice. But I also had to return to business to prevent the complete ruin of our family business. In the end, thanks to persistent efforts, everything worked out, and I realized it was time to come back to you. I'm sorry for making you go through all of this, Sophia. Blake concluded his story, and Sophia gently kissed him. It's okay, the main thing is that you're with me now, she said, radiating with joy. Blake got down on one knee in front of Sophia and asked with trembling voice, "Darling, will you marry me?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears of happiness, and she exclaimed, "Yes, yes, of course, I agree." They embraced and merged in a long, passionate kiss, savoring the moment. Then they decided to spend the rest of the evening at a restaurant, discussing their future life together and even choosing a name for their future child. From the restaurant, they went to Blake's apartment, which was located on the 16th floor of an upscale high-rise building, offering a beautiful view of the city. The lovers admired the cityscape and openly dreamt about their future. The next day, they went to a jewelry store where Blake purchased 2 rings made of the highest quality pure gold. A week later, in the luxurious restaurant Sophia chose for the wedding, a magnificent wedding with 500 guests took place. Among the guests were Sophia's colleagues, Uncle Wright, Aunt Holly, Aunt Thea, and many others. They all realized that they had underestimated their Cinderella and even envied her a little, but in a friendly and kind way. It was the beginning of a new, happy chapter in Blake and Sophia's life, a chapter they would write together. The newlyweds went on their honeymoon to Easter Island, a place that had long been a dream for both of them. There, among the mysterious statues and stunning landscapes, they found their happiness and strengthened their love. Upon returning home on schedule, their son was born. A beautiful, healthy boy they named Matthew, in honor of Blake's father. Matthew was the bright embodiment of their love and hopes for a new beginning. Blake became deeply involved in his business and became proficient in its operations. Soon, the profits generated by the salons began to grow, and his perseverance was rewarded. He didn't abandon his passion for poetry, anthropology, and soon published a collection of poems titled Silver Snowflakes, with a dedication to my beloved princess, to whom I owe my life. Sophia stopped working as a nurse and devoted herself entirely to motherhood. Their son Matthew grew up and brought joy to both parents with his presence. The staff at the shelter where she used to work fondly remembered the beautiful Cinderella who was lucky enough to find her prince. Blake and Sophia, after overcoming all difficulties and trials, found their happiness and were able to build a beautiful future together, filling it with love, family warmth, and shared dreams.